Hello. So we are going to be covering section 2.8 today, factor by grouping and factoring completely. And so what I'm going to expect you to do as I am writing these things down is for you to write them down. When I get back, hopefully everything will be filled out. That's the goal, is to have most of these problems done. A lot of them are going to be working with your groups and those at your table. I am also fine if you, well, we'll talk about that later. But okay, our learning targets for today are: I can factor polynomials by grouping, I can factor polynomials completely, I can use factoring to solve real life problems. So we're going to use the real life problems next time in class. So, factoring by grouping. To factor a polynomial with 4 terms, group the terms into pairs, factor the greatest common factor out of each pair of terms, look for and factor out the common binomial factor. This process is called factoring by grouping. And we have actually done factoring by grouping within our 2.6 notes, where we were doing our AC method or our box method. So we've already done this, but it's just looking at it differently. Okay, so this asks us to factor the following polynomials by grouping. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your terms and you're going to group the first 2 terms together and the second 2 terms together. And then we learned the box method in this class, so now what we're going to do is draw our box and we're going to put our terms in there. So our first 2 terms go in the top and our second 2 terms go in the bottom. So we have x cubed, 3x squared, 2x, and 6. Now I just look, what's my greatest common factor between these 2 terms? And that's going to be the x squared term. That's the biggest one they both share. What times x squared gives me x cubed? So if I have 2 here and I want 3, then I just need 1 more. So that would be just x. And then what times x squared gives me 3x squared? And that would just be 3. And then I think, what times x gives me 2x? And that's just going to be a 2. And then you can check. 2 times 3 is 6. Yep, I did that right. So then you check and you write that out. X plus 3 times x squared plus 2. And you can look, is there anything else that I can factor in these 2 terms? X plus 3 is factored completely. X squared plus 2 is factored completely. Now remember from our 2.7 lesson, if this was a minus, we could use the special product of squares, but we don't have a minus there. So this is factored completely. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do our next part B. So what I want you to do is hit pause and allow the class about 20 seconds to group these and put them inside their box. Okay, so I'm going to now show you what I did, and you can check your work. So I've grouped those 2 together and the last 2 together. So I'm going to draw my box. And my first 2 terms, top and bottom. My second 2 terms, top and bottom. So I'm going to look at these. What is my greatest common factor between x squared and y? It's just 1. What is my greatest, or what times 1 gives me x squared? X squared. What times 1 gives me y? And a y. And now I can think, what times x squared just gives me an x? And their greatest common factor would be x. But x times x squared is not x. And so this problem right here is going to be prime. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go on to this next part. Sorry, I got to focus. And I'm going to do 2 more odd problems, and then I'm going to have you attempt the even problems. So let's start with number 1. So we're going to group our first 2 terms together and our last 2 terms together. Let's put them in our box. So I got b cubed, negative 4b squared, b and minus 4. And so I'm going to look, what's my greatest common factor there? I got a b squared. What times b squared gives me b cubed? A b. What times b squared gives me negative 4b squared? And that would be negative 4. And what times b gives me b? That would be 1. And 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. So I've done it. And I got b minus 4 and b squared plus 1. Again, I'm going to check, is there anything else I can factor out between these? And it looks like we're done. So, here we go. Okay. Now I'm going to do number 3. If you need to pause along this video at all or rewind it for students who have questions, you can do that as well. Okay, now we've got our d squared plus 2c plus cd plus 2d. So let's factor that grouping. And we are going to come here, draw our box. We have d squared, 2c, cd, and 2d. Okay, we're going to look at our greatest common factor. So our greatest common factor between these 2 terms looks like there is not a greatest common factor. Let's look down here. Is there a greatest common factor? That greatest common factor is d. And our greatest common factor here is also d. Greatest common factor here is 2. What times d gives me d squared? Let's see if this works. Greatest common factor here is just 1, but that doesn't work. So this is prime. Okay. Alright, so now I want you to pause the video and I want you to attempt questions 2 and question 4. So factor by grouping on 2 and 4. And I would say take about 5 minutes to do so, to work on questions 2 and 4. And once you get that done, I will have the answers. You can pause the video. I'll go through and explain it after you go through those 5 minutes. So pause the video now. Okay, so here's the answer for this one. I group. I put them in my boxes. AC, AD, BC, and BD. My greatest common factor is A. What times A gives me AC? That would be C. What times A gives me AD would be D. And then we'll check here. What times C gives me BC? And that would be B. And then we can check. B times D is BD. Yep. So then we get C plus D times A plus B. And that's your answer. So if you got that, way to go. If you didn't get it, that's totally fine as well. Just go back and see what you can do to fix it and where your process was different than mine. Okay, and then check your answer on this number 4. 5t cubed, 6t squared, 5t and 6. Their greatest common factor is t squared. What times t squared is 5t cubed? That's 5t. What times t squared is 6t squared, which is 6. 5t gives me 5t would be 1. 1 times 6 is 6. So then that's the right answer as well. So you get 5t plus 6 and t squared plus 1. There's nothing else I can factor, and so that's my final answer. Okay. Again, I want you to pause the video, and now I want you to work on question 6 to check your work. I'll write up the answer and then flip the page after you're done to this page. Okay, so now work on question 6. Take about 2 minutes I'll write up the answer. So pause the video now. Okay, just factoring the grouping to give you your final answer. Greatest common factor between these would be 2a squared. What times 2a squared gives me 12a cubed? That would be 6a. What times 2a squared gives me 2a squared? That would be 1. What times 6a gives me negative 30a? That would be negative 5. And negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. So 6a plus 1, 2a squared minus 5. Okay, so this one, the reason why I wanted you to pause is if you've gotten to this point, this is what I've taught you so far. And so now what I want to teach you is if you have a 2a squared minus 5, what you're going to do there. You can actually just leave your answer, but if there was a 2a squared minus 5, I'll give you extra credit on your test if you get a situation like this and can simplify that more. So I'll teach you how. So recall notes 2.7, where we have a squared minus b squared equals a plus b times a minus b. So then this would be 6a plus 1. And then this would actually be the square root of 2a minus square root 5 times square root 2a plus square root 5. Oh, gross. So if you write that, I don't expect you don't have to do that on your test, but if you do, I'll give you an extra credit point. That's going beyond and simplifying that more. Okay, so flip your page now. So we're up here. You can factor polynomial completely. So this is just, I'm going to actually have you skip that question. So we're just going to skip that so you can cross that out. Okay, so now we're going to go down. And so what you're going to do is you're just going to factor, you don't have to use your answer from above, you're just going to factor each polynomial below completely. So that's just finding the greatest common factor and factoring it fully. So I would say first you're going to look for the greatest common factor, and then second, factor using a method taught in class. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. Look for your greatest common factor and then factor using a method taught in class. Okay, so the greatest common factor, we're going to look for that here. If you notice, they all have an x, so that's a greatest common factor. We can factor that out. So if I factor out the x, I'm left with an x squared plus a 4x plus 3. So now notice that my a is equal to 1, so I can use my 2.5 notes or that guess and check method. And I've got my 3 and I want it to add up to 4, so my factors are 1 and 3. 1 plus 3 is 4, so that works. So I would get x times x plus 1, x plus 3. Okay, so what I want you to do now is I want you to pause the video and I want you to do problems B and C. And once, I'll give you about 5 minutes. Once you've done that, I'll put up, or I'll work out the answers so that you can check them. Okay, pause the video now.